It's scary and I don't like it. Hold me.
We missed a lot this week, or last week, I guess.
You missed a lot. I was here.
He says with not a hint of bitterness.
No, of course not. John, bitter?
No, surely not.
I did want to mention quickly the Dave Morin Vanity Fair thing.
Oh, God.
Because I think, from what I can tell, based on some things I've seen, both from him making a few little comments here and there, and from a few other people, including the magazine's esteemed editor Glenn Fleischman, who apparently talked to him a little bit more. It sounds like it was pretty overblown. Like, it sounds like the Vanity Fair reporter might have been exaggerating or taking some of those things really far out of context or mangling them somewhat. So I want to give the guy a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and because I've had reporters mangle stuff I've told them, and it's terrible because it makes you look like a total douche, and certainly his thing did make him look that way, but we don't really know how much of that he really said and how bad it really is. So I do want to give the guy the benefit of the doubt and just maybe and float the idea that might not have been entirely accurate, because it sounds like it probably wasn't.
I mean, I don't know. Could any human being be that much of a colossal jerk without intending it? I mean,
I don't know if he's so much of a jerk, because if I had given those answers and people had complained about me giving those answers, I feel like I could defend them. I didn't read the whole thing, but I saw most of the quotes and they did seem ridiculous. But assuming they are talking about real things, I would say to the people who didn't like them, come at me, bro. Like, they'd be like, "Oh, you got two phones. You got one for the day and one for the night." I'd be like, "Yeah, because I don't like a battery pack makes my phone bigger, and so if I have two phones,
right,
and I can't charge it all day because I'm running around from meeting to meeting, so having two phones lets me have a skinnier one." Like that, you could defend it. Now,
And
I'm not saying that,
he actually did defend that particular point. He said in some Twitter reply to somebody that what he really said was that he has. And he does have two iPhones, which is ridiculous, but he is also a very successful tech company CEO. So, it's not like, it goes with the territory to some degree. But he said the reason he has two is he has one of them for only work stuff and only work apps, and the other one for only personal stuff, so that he can leave work at work and not be distracted by personal stuff. So that actually, okay, I still don't really ever see myself having two iPhones, even if money was no object. But I could see why he would do that.
It's not a great solution, but
right.
I'd feel like you could explain it and defend it. Now, what you can't explain and defend is, assuming the quotes are accurate, is saying those things in the context of an interview and not thinking people are going to think you sound like a tool, because you will. You have to. Certain things need to be provide context, and if you don't think you're going to be able to provide that context, or, it's not the right forum to do that. Like, say you're talking with your friends about how you manage your phones. That's the time to pull out, I have one for work and one for home and stuff like that. Because it's not extravagant cost-wise, and it is kind of annoying. I bet he has lots of problems syncing stuff up between the phones and stuff. But that's the context where you bring this up. You don't bring it up in hey, we're talking to you for a magazine interview. That's not the time to bring that up. So he made some strategic errors in when to bring things up. And the always being on the offensive, defensive, you could say that as a joke. Meaning mostly you keep your ringer off because you don't want to be disturbed during the day, and the person says and asks you why, so what, the offense defense thing. It's a funny joke, but if you just see the words written there, you're like, he's dead serious. He thinks,
Well, one of the theories I heard, which right at the beginning, right after it was published, somebody said that it looks like he might have just been trolling them. And if you go into it with that theory and you read it again, you can kind of see that. That's actually, I would say that is equally plausible as he's that much of a douche. I'd say those are equal.
I would agree with that. You told me that we had discussed this when I had first arrived in New York last week, and when you first said that, I was like, no, well, maybe it's possible. So,
but really, I think the way more likely answer is that he wasn't trying to intentionally troll them, and he isn't that much of a douche. And the real answer is it was just blown out of proportion by the reporter.
He might not be that self-aware. If you are,
that's true.
It's hard to tell. Look at the picture. The picture he's got of himself. He does like collars that stick up. You have to give him that. And
that is true.
And the pictures are kind of precious, and you would think, someone who's just a little bit more self-aware and perhaps not a CEO of a big important company might like I couldn't put a picture of myself like that. Like I don't know. It's a tough call, but this is a fluff non-story anyway, and it'll just come and go, and I don't fault him as a person for any of this silliness.
Speaking of silliness, I guess let's go chronologically. Facebook Home.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that, and I was never big into Facebook, although it seems from what I can tell that both you guys, even at your peak, liked Facebook a lot less than I liked Facebook. But I mean, I look at it a few times a week because it seems socially awkward not to.
I have never looked at Facebook a few times a week, ever.
So, and that's exactly my point, is that I think I at my peak, certainly, and even now, I probably have embraced it more than I think either of you gentlemen. But, and I think I could get away without ever looking at it. And certainly Erin and I have mostly the same circle of friends, so she could keep me updated on the 800 people that are having babies right now. But I don't know. I couldn't imagine an entire phone experience based solely off of what all my friends are doing. And furthermore, it seems to me like one of the things that society is challenged with these days, that sounded way overblown, but I'm going to roll with it now, is that you're never in the moment. You're always worrying about what your Twitter people are saying, your Twitter followers are saying, or what your Instagram followers are commenting on and liking and so on and so forth. And this seems to just make that even worse. I don't know. I just don't get it.
I think it depends on, for me, one of the reasons why I've never gotten into Facebook, I have an account, but I've never been active. In fact, my wife created the account for me when we got engaged so that she would have something to point to.
So she could put you as fiance.
Yeah, exactly. That's when I got my account, and that's why I got my account. And she made the whole thing
very symbolic and apt.
Yeah. But, and so I've never really been active because it's not that I fundamentally object to the product. I don't really care either way on that front. It's that Facebook is set up to conflate the idea of people you know and people whose content you want to follow online. And to me, those are very much non-overlapping circles. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And that's why, the beauty of Twitter, at first, Facebook didn't even have asymmetric following. I think now it does. I don't even know for sure. That's how little I use it. And usually I'll end up logging in like maybe once every 2 or 3 months to answer some message from somebody that I probably should answer that I get an email notification about. And so every time I log in, there's a totally different interface, and it confuses the crap out of me. And I never know how to do anything or what's going on or where something is.
You're like an old man.
Yeah, really. I need the kids to explain it to me. That's how I am every time I log into Facebook.
I don't need the kids to explain it to me. I know an annoying product when I see one. I'm like,
right.
No, this is. I know all the things that it can do, and I can figure out how to do them eventually. I just do not want to do them. Do not want is my reaction to Facebook entirely. And I have to stop myself from how people get, they get all angry about Apple, and they're just angry at Apple, and you just mention anything about, I got my new iPad. They say, I hate Apple, and they just get angry. I have to stop myself from having that feeling about Facebook. We don't curse in this podcast, right?
I said douche 4 times. I mean, we can curse lightly.
I'll abbreviate, but every time someone mentions anything about Facebook, I just hear it in passing, this voice in my head says, "Man, F Facebook." And wait a second, why are you getting angry about it? It's just a website where people do stuff and they enjoy things. That's a good way for people to connect. And people, not everyone can have their own website, and it's a way for people to post pictures to each other and social. My rational brain knows why Facebook exists and is popular, but this other part of me has this visceral hatred of it.
Well, one thing I really don't like,
struggle.
It's one thing to say this is a website where people can communicate. Tumblr is a lot of those same things for people. So, I got to see that develop, and I think what's different with things like Tumblr versus things like Facebook is that Facebook is one of these companies. We've had a few of these in our history of this industry. It's one of these companies where if something is having some success, they want a piece of it too, and they can't stand not to be in a market. And the originator of this was Microsoft. And
in our lifetime, anyway.
In our industry,
yeah,
I would say. Like, I don't think like the previous giants like IBM, I don't think they were ever quite like
Microsoft
this.
was much worse about this than Facebook is so far, because
Yeah, that's true.
Microsoft would do anything. Like, if anyone became remotely popular, like, well, we're going to do one of those. And Facebook at least is like, all right, well, lots of people can go off and do lots of other things, but, you know, they didn't make a music player when the iPod was popular. They didn't make, a tablet. I mean, like the phone, they're not as like, Microsoft was like, anybody does anything, even if it looks like they're going to fail, we'll make a failure product alongside it just in case.
Well, you know what? Let's merge with NBC too, or whatever they did, or buy NBC.
Yeah, I mean, like a TV, interactive TV
venture.
could be the future.
Whatever
People could be
it
doing
was.
things on TV, and like, yeah, they're not as desperate as feeling as Microsoft. But it's that type of vibe where a company gets big enough, and I think this is a rational thing. Google and Facebook both do it. Is like, look, we are big and successful, but if we're just content to be what we are going to get left behind. And so all the companies are looking to see what the next thing is going to be. And like, Google decided, look, we need to do something with social, and they like refocus their entire company on Google Plus. And Facebook, already the king of social, said, we see the area where we're weak is in mobile, and that is not going away. That's going to be a big thing, and we got to figure out something there. So I think it's a reasonable strategy for companies who are very large not to be happy with what they are and just get better at it, but to look for the other thing that's going to be big. Not everything. Not like Facebook's not making a game console. They're not like doing things that will deliver groceries to your house or whatever, like whatever eBay's doing, stuff like that. Like they've picked a reasonable thing, I think, for like, look, we have to be in mobile. If we're not in mobile, we're screwed long term, and so they're doing something.
Well, the way they're doing it, though, and this is partly why I brought up the sprawl argument. The way they're doing it is seemingly designed with the assumption that everyone using it exclusively uses Facebook or primarily uses Facebook as their communication mechanism to anybody. And it seems like, and part of that might just be like blindness to people who only partially care about Facebook or communicate with some of their friends on Facebook and some not. And part of it might be an effort to actively extinguish that kind of use and to convert those people to spread the tentacles and bring them in and kind of railroad them into using Facebook for way more of the communication that they previously were doing through other channels like text messaging or anything else. And that kind of rubs me the wrong way, like that. So if it's just ignorance where they're just thinking, well, of course everyone who uses Facebook only uses Facebook. That's one thing. I don't think they're that stupid though. Facebook has shown extremely good product sensibilities, skills in getting people in and keeping them there. So I don't think you can attribute any Facebook move to stupidity. I think they have very, very smart people running that company, and so it's not like Microsoft, but they have extremely smart people running that company. So they know exactly what they're doing, and I think it's very clear what they're doing here. They are extinguishing, or at least attempting to extinguish, any other communication methods on the phones that have been infected by this home thing.
Well, not extinguishing it. All the old stuff is still there too. But
well, they're trying to bury it. Is what I'm saying. Like by taking over the lock screen.
They just want to be there too. Like if they're not a sibling, at least with SMS, text messaging, or whatever other thing people are using. If they're not at least a sibling with that, if you have to launch the Facebook app, that they're subordinate to the rest of the phone experience, kind of like they are on iOS, right? They think they should at least be a sibling with those things, and since Android allows you to take over the lock screen and stuff, now it looks like they're out in front of everything else. But I would still call that a sibling just because it's the first thing you see. It's still like alongside the other stuff.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think we'll see how it plays out, because one very careful line they have to walk is if they do go too far in that direction of being too aggressive and not working very well, or making the phone not work very well, if you want to do a lot of non-Facebook communication, that if they go too far in that direction, they'll have fewer installs of this thing and fewer sales of those phones that have it pre-installed. So, they have to walk that line somewhat. I guess it'll be interesting to see how this plays out and to see, does this, is this still roughly the same kind of thing in 6 months or a year, and how many people are using it?
Yeah, the thing I was thinking about for home and for another topic I hope we talk about, I have a blog post stewing on this, and I will go ahead and spoil the whole blog post because
Does it involve a utensil?
There's not that much overlap, it seems, between people who read the blog and people who listen to the podcast, because very often I choose not to blog something that I podcasted about, and people are like, what are you talking about, podcast? I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, so in both of these situations, I'm viewing it kind of like an RTS a little bit, and the resource that is critical to victory in the realm of both Facebook Home and also in the WebKit Blink thing is developers. They need to mine for more developers, basically. And the reason I'm thinking about it in that respect, and I'm talking about developers who make this stuff, is that on home, everyone's like, oh, this is just a precursor. They're going to fork Android. They're going to do their own OS, right? They could do the lock screen now, but like clearly they're going to make their own phone OS. And thanks Google for giving us the head start with Android. We'll take what you've got and go off in our own direction, kind of like Blink did with WebKit, right? And the same thing with Samsung. We're like, oh, Samsung's working on their Android port. Thanks, Google, for all this your hard work. Now we're off to the races. Haha, screw you, Google. We're making all the money. You're screwed. Like they can't beat Facebook with Google Plus, and they can't make money off Android because Samsung's selling all the phones and making all the profit. So poor Google did all the work to make Android, and other people just stole it and did what they wanted. Like that's one narrative about this thing. But in the case of Samsung and Facebook, I have to think. Look, does Facebook have the skill to say, oh, thanks, Google, we're taking Android and we'll just take it from here. We'll fork it and we'll go off on our own. Can they support a platform? Can they develop an OS on an ongoing basis?
Do they need to?
Well, but that's the whole thing. Like, it's saying, okay, you either fork it, in which case, okay, well, you're on your own. It's not like you're going to keep merging with the next version of Android that Google puts out. You will diverge. You will fork. You will split. You will not be able to benefit from the future work that Google does, or it'll be very difficult for you. Otherwise, you're not forking. Otherwise, you're just piggybacking. So when people say, oh, they're going to make their own OS and it'll be a fork, like you're giving up being able to do sane merges with the next major version of Android. Like, you're either going to be the platform owner or you're not. Right now, Google is the platform owner because they made it. They continue to make it. The next version of the OS comes from them. And the other people say, okay, well, Google's come up with the next major version. Let's integrate it and screw it up in some way and put our little crap on it, right? And that's what Facebook's doing now. But a fork is become master of your own destiny. Own the OS. We make our own OS. It used to be based on Android, yeah, whatever, but now it's our own thing, and we develop it. We support the developers, like to the point where you could have application compatibility diversion some point in the future, because that's what a fork eventually leads to, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this one works on Facebook's OS, but not on like regular Android, not on Samsung's OS. And I don't think Facebook has the ability to be a platform owner. They, maybe they can hire up that ability. Certainly, they didn't have the ability to make a well-designed UI until they hired all those designers. But right now, I don't think Facebook has the ability to be a platform owner, because that is a high bar. Like how many successful platform owners have we seen in our industry? Microsoft, Apple, Google,
and Facebook.
They're not making a native OS. That's what I'm talking about. Like,
well,
yes,
see, and that's the thing, is that it is a very big distinction, but to kind of shove that aside just for a moment, I mean, when I remember back to the original days of Facebook, where it was completely Facebook controlled, there were no apps, there was no freaking Farmville or anything like that. It was a very different place, and that was really about sharing your life. And at that point, it wasn't yet about throwing away all of your privacy, or if it was, they were quieter about it. But now, to your point, it's not a native platform, but it's still, to a large degree, it's a platform. I mean, you have all these different apps, if you were to call them that, running on top of their platform, and they've done a lot of kind of wild things in order to make their platform work. And what comes to mind, and this is kind of what you guys were saying about them having so many really bright people there. And Marco, I presume you would know better than I. Didn't they write like a PHP to C++ cross compiler or something like that?
Yeah, sure, at some point they did some crazy thing, but that's server side. Like I think they have a web platform and they have an API platform, but like writing an OS, like you have a hardware device and you are the operating system on the hardware device, and you build up in layers from the thing controlling the cell radio to the graphics system to every other part. Like it's an OS, an actual native OS. And Google is doing all that work now.
Well, not quite. They started with Linux. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I know.
Let's be realistic here.
Right, but like they didn't fork Linux, right?
Right.
It's like they have a base foundation that they follow, but when you do the OS part, like that's where you're making the API, and the new version has a different API for scrolling and has different buttons and has this. Like that's OS development, and OS development involves all that annoying crap of like, oh, you got to have API documentation, you got to have a developer program, and you got to have an SDK, and you got to make sure the tools work. Like all the crap that Apple does, all the crap that Google does for its Google develop, like, and you have to develop the OS. You have to make it better year after year. They want a new major version that does something better, that has faster graphics, that uses the GPU better, that has new APIs. It takes a lot of people, a lot of skill, a lot of expertise to do that. And it's not easy. And I don't, like, Amazon was the example, like, oh, they forked Android to make their little tablet thing. Amazon's, they forked it and it's their own thing, but they don't have the skills in-house to continue to develop their own OS. They're going to have to either just be this, like, evolutionary dead end that slowly evolves in whatever direction they want, or they're going to have to do some super painful resync or another refork or something. But clearly they have not, like, taken the reins of the OS.
I think they actually have, like, pulled more recent changes from Google into their version already. For some of the newer devices, I'm pretty sure somebody told me that they had done that. But
see, if they're doing that, they're not really much of a fork at that point. Then you're just kind of like you're just one of those people who's taking what Android's done and mutating it and trying to, like, you either have your own OS or you don't, or are you dependent on Google or not? Like, if Google decides we're not developing Android anymore, are you screwed? That's how you can tell whether you are really the master of your own destiny. Like, Apple is not relying on anyone to develop their OS. Microsoft is not relying on, neither is Google. Like, but if Google just folds its arms and says, you know what, never mind that Android stuff, we're going to stop developing it. Everyone who makes an Android device who has been using, like, Android in any form are going to be like, but then next year when Apple comes out with a new version of their mobile OS, what will we do? And Google should be like, well, what is it? Someone could quote from Watchmen right now if they knew the quote, but I don't. But you nerds listening do, so imagine it in your head right now. Yeah,
well, I think it's
that's
worth
how you can tell whether you're
though,
independent.
It's worth considering what happens in that scenario. Let's say not that Google stops developing Android.
No, they're not going to do it. But I'm just saying that's just like a thought exercise to see if you really are independent.
Well, but what if they take it closed source?
That's probably even less likely than them stopping development.
I don't know. Is it?
So I think the licensing prevents them from actually doing that on a go-forward basis. Like, I don't think they can just close the door and say, okay, well, what we released so far is open, but going forward, all of that will be closed.
Why? If Amazon can do it, why can't
Amazon,
Google?
I don't think Amazon has everything. I don't know the licensing issues involved there, but that seems very unlikely, like, legally speaking, and even if it's legally, like, politically, can you imagine what would happen there? Like, it's much more likely that they will use their licensing agreements with the Google. Their licensing agreements with the Google services to be like, you know how, like, if you want to be able to use the Google services with your thing and be certified as an Android device and all the other tools they have to put people in lines they've been trying to use, like get carriers to stop mucking up their OS and stuff, they probably will continue to turn the screws on those. But that doesn't do anything against, like, Amazon probably, because if they just, like, oh, well, you can't even call your thing Android. All right, fine, we won't. Okay, well, you can't even use the Google Play Store. Okay, fine, we won't. We'll have our own store. I mean, like, I don't know what kind of screws they can turn on Amazon. And I don't think they could bring it closed source. But same type of deal. Say they did take it closed source. If you all of a sudden are sweating bullets because you realize you do not have people who can develop, maintain, support at mobile OS, which is an incredibly complicated thing, right? Then you realize, oh, geez, we really were a parasite on Google, which may have been bad for Google and great for you when it was happening, but realize that's what you are. So everyone who's clamoring for a Facebook fork or a Samsung fork. I think Samsung is even less likely to be able to develop their own mobile OS, right?
That would be
possible
hilarious,
both of them could staff up to do it. Like, Facebook just bought OS Meta, which was that company run by Amit Singh, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the author of the gigantic Mac OS X internals book that's off to my right now. He's a smart guy, heavily into OSs. He did this, like, stealth startup that we don't even know what they're doing with a bunch of other smart people, and Facebook bought them. I tweeted this afternoon that, like, now he's got an OS. Now Facebook has an OS internals team, so maybe they are staffing up for it. But, like, that's the resource that they need to mine for. If you want to be independent of Google and be a player in the mobile space, along with Apple, Microsoft, RIM, and Google, whoever you want to say out there who has actually a mobile platform, you've got to be master of your own destiny and do that.
I wonder, though. I think it's worth considering. Let's say something happened with Google or with Android, or something happened where it forced Amazon to no longer be able to pull changes from Google, whatever it is, whether it's going closed source or whether it just becomes really impossible for them to do it, or Google does something else, who knows. But suppose Amazon has to basically get stuck with what they have so far and either let it stagnate forever and just build minor things on top of it, or hire some ridiculously large OS team to develop that, which is a major undertaking, as you said. How long do you think they could go without doing that? Like, how long do you think they could keep selling Kindle branded tablets and maybe even eventually phones while keeping the same rough version of Android they have now and just doing minor tweaks of it as necessary over time?
A couple of years, probably.
I'm thinking it might be like 10 years.
Not 10, because, like, I mean, think about, I know things have matured a little bit and it's not like horrendously slow or whatever, but, hardware, even if just in terms of hardware support, hardware moves on. Like, 10 years, all the phones are going to be using 64-bit system on a chips, and they're going to have a 32-bit OS. And so, like, right away, you just forget it. You need to do something there. You're not going to be, maybe those chips won't even run 32-bit stuff, or, like, you have to have a solution for fat binaries, and maybe it's a different architecture. Maybe they're all x86 then. God knows what's going to happen in 10 years. They cannot last that long, but a couple of years they could do it. And by the end of that run, it would be like, boy, this really doesn't, the Amazon stuff already feels clunky and slow. Like, it's not even awesome now. So they don't have a big cushion.
But nobody buys the Amazon hardware because it's good. Because it's not. It's actually really, really quite terrible in most ways. But
the hardware
nobody
isn't
buys
bad.
it
It's
for
just
that.
The OS is not great.
Well, and nobody buys it for that either.
Yeah,
People buy the
that's-
Amazon stuff because of price and because of the Amazon content ecosystem. Those are the two, in that order, those are the two big reasons why people buy the Amazon stuff.
I wish I knew how many people were actually buying Kindle Fire tablets, and of those people, how many people were using them like tablets and not just as a way to play Angry Birds and read books.
Oh, but John, it's a record number of Kindle buyers this year.
I'm
it's like
sure
20%
it is.
more than last year.
Yeah.
And last year, it was the number one selling product on Amazon.
Yeah, I don't pay attention to them until they've come to play, right? Because reading, fine. Yeah, they're doing. I assume they're doing well in that because I don't see anyone else being dominant in the e-reading space. But in the tablet space, it seems like they're just haven't really committed. But they're like, Amazon is patient, so they'll keep doing what they're doing. And I don't doubt, like, of all the companies, Amazon has shown that it's willing to staff up to do crazy ass stuff. So maybe someday they will be. Jeff Bezos will wake up and say, you know what? We need an OS team. Hire everybody. And we won't. They don't need to make any money for another 2 decades. So
Right.
Yeah, and so the reason I bring that up in the context of Blink is because Blink is a similar situation where you had WebKit, it was KHTML with a bunch of Linux nerds making their stuff for like Conqueror and everything. Apple comes along and says, actually, we have we're going to pay people to develop this, and they will quickly dwarf all your efforts because they're highly motivated, highly paid, highly skilled people versus your group of Linux volunteers. And lo and behold, guess what? Now we are the rulers of this thing, and we dub it WebKit. And thanks a lot, KHTML, KJS. We are now running the show here. And then Google comes along, makes its browser Chrome, and says, oh, we'll use WebKit. That's great. And Apple and Google go in lockstep, developing stuff until eventually it's like Google has more committers and is putting more code into WebKit than Apple is. And then, there's this tension between the different process models and all this other stuff, and they can't cooperate each other because they're deadly enemies, and they're supposed to be working on the same project, and Google says, you know what, we're going off on our own. And at that point, Google is entirely able to support its development. If anything, Apple might be like, but does that mean you're not going to contribute security fixes to WebKit anymore? Because those are really nice. We like those. And, like Google made its own JavaScript engine, which was pretty darn good. And Apple wasn't like, man, we were so proud of our JavaScript engine. They just made their own, and they keep making theirs better. And I guess ours is good. But, like, geez, every 2 weeks they keep making that thing faster, and it's scary, and I don't like it. Hold me. So, so this is a situation where Google has the developers. Google does not need to mine for more developer resources. They are in the driver's seat of Blink. I have no trouble believing that they will continue to develop Blink at if not even more rapid pace than they have been developing WebKit. And I feel like Apple is the one who is a little bit sheepish in this situation and going, geez, we really were benefiting from Google putting all those developers against WebKit. And now, presumably some percentage, not all, but some percentage of those guys are only going to be committing to Blink. And that's kind of not a great situation for Apple to be in. But of course, if Blink really is open, Apple can always switch to it in a couple of years.
Oh, yeah, right. Like that would ever happen.
It would happen. If they keep it open, I could see it happening. Either that or Apple needs to replace those developers to keep up the pace, because web rendering engines is complex and a competitive field.
I think it's interesting. We've always heard that, and as far as I know, this is still true, that that teams at Apple are really quite small, and that their overall engineering staff is not nearly as big as you would think it would be for the number of products they have, the amount of money they make, etc. And I think this is one of those things where similar to server infrastructure, where their model just does not stand up to competition from other big tech giants, especially somebody like Google, where Google is willing to throw massive engineering resources at almost any problem that they want to solve. And so, like, if Apple wants to keep its teams small, which seems to be the way it's set up to work, and certainly it seems like that's just a choice they've made. If they want to keep their team small and not throw massive resources at this one particular problem, then they won't be able to compete. They won't be able to keep up in this market anymore. It's gotten too big for that model to work.
Well, they have small numbers of really smart people.
Sure, but at some point it becomes just a time problem.
Yeah, well, Google has larger numbers of equally smart people. So that's
exactly.
That's where the problem is. They don't think they fear anything from Samsung throwing 100 times the number of bodies at it, but they're all mediocre.
Yeah, Samsung has never shown any ability to write good software, and for that matter, neither has Amazon on the client side. Amazon writes pretty good server-side software, but their client-side software has always been pretty abysmal.
So, stupid question. WebKit, is that C and C++? Is that right?
I think.
WebKit, you mean?
Yeah, isn't that what I just said? WebKit is C++, is it not?
Is it Italian?
I don't know.
The reason I ask is I was just thinking to myself, I don't know, all the different kinds of things that Apple works on, but off the top of my head, obviously all their OS X and iOS stuff, that's all Objective-C by and large. What is Clang? Is Clang C++?
Clang is C++. It's built as a series of C++ libraries.
Right. So what I'm thinking is you couldn't take, in principle anyway, you couldn't take a bunch of iOS or OS X developers and say, hey, go work on WebKit. I mean, obviously, if you're a good developer, you can figure it out. But if these are people who are living and breathing Objective-C, and you throw them into the world of what I presume to be very complex and difficult C++, that's not easy. And I can't imagine that the Clang team, A, is very big, and B, has enough free time to go and just decide to be WebKit gurus. And, they also do web objects, which is Java, if I'm not mistaken. So, again, not exactly apples to apples, pardon the crummy pun. But I guess what I'm saying is if they wanted to throw a bunch of bodies at the WebKit problem, I would assume that there's not that many bodies to throw that are that good at C++. And either way, it sounds like one of the other things we heard lately, or at least that I heard or saw fly by lately, is that apparently iOS 7 is running behind, and so all the OS, did I get that right? And all the OS 10 developers have been punted over to iOS 7 to get that squared away before WWDC.
Yeah, that is the rumor. Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's an issue of language familiarity. I think it's an issue of code-based familiarity. And
that's a very good point.
Programmers are not interchangeable widgets, Casey. Pointy-haired boss. You can't just take the programmer and put him into slot. No, like those teams are dedicated to people with knowledge, skills, and experience in specific areas. That's why it's, you can't actually mine for developers like in StarCraft. It's not like you could say, we need more web engine. How many people in the world do you think there are that can even be useful working on a world-class JavaScript interpreter for web engines? Like, the number of people who even qualify for that is small, and the people who have done it before, have experience, and can make their engine faster than the next guys, like, it's slim pickings for that. I don't know how many people there are in the world who, the people on the V8 team and the Nitro team at Apple, and I guess maybe those crazy people doing the Rust-based thing at Mozilla and Samsung, like, that's it. That's like that's the pool of people in the world who have like years of experience making JavaScript engines. And getting someone up to speed, even if you're the world's best programmer in whatever language, is going to take you a long time.
Absolutely. My point was just that if they wanted to handle this internally, I agree with everything you just said. It's not as easy as just picking up the chess piece and moving it over a few spots. But if they wanted to handle this internally, I don't know that would be easy, regardless of the unfamiliarity of the code base. And so then you have to start talking about, well, let's go hire a bunch of people to throw at the problem. And that's just not an easy thing to do.
I don't think it's necessarily an issue of not having the right talent in the company. I think it's an issue of not wanting to allocate it to that project. Because, for the most part, WebKit is, Apple's version of WebKit is very competitive. In general, it works well, and it doesn't seem like a pressing issue.
Well, wait a second. I'm going to actually stop you there. It works and works well, because this is another thing that I think of when I think of the WebKit Blink divorce and who's holding the short end of the stick when who's missing a chair when the music stops, and how it might be Apple. Chrome, was sort of developed in secret, came out of nowhere. We're going to use WebKit. Here we go. But they did their own process model with the process per tab and stuff, because
right.
Right.
And not knowing the details of how it's implemented, but just having used both browsers a lot, I think it's very safe to say that Chrome's implementation is way better than Safari's.
Right, and so theirs came first, and Apple wanted to do something similar, and Google wouldn't give it to them because Google did that code above the engine layer, it's in the Chrome app itself. It's still open source. It's still in the Chromium code base. Apple could have forked it and grabbed it and whatever, but it's not in the engine. And Apple and the WebKit team implemented it in the engine so that even if you embed WebKit inside your just random application, you still get multi-process. Whereas in Chrome's model, I don't know if you can, they're still using WebKit, but Chrome does the multi-processing stuff. Chrome handles figuring out how many processes correspond to which tabs and managing them and reaping them and doing all that stuff. That's in the Chrome application. So if you were to take out, the WebKit core that they're using and embed it, you would not get multi-process protection. Whereas if you embedded Apple's WebKit, you would. But anyway, the proof is in the pudding, as you said. Chrome did it first, and when Apple tried to do it, Safari was wonky for 2 years. It's still
I would
wonky.
say it still is.
Yeah, I still get web page is not responding. Would you like to reload? That never happens to me in Chrome. And there's a new friggin' build of Chrome every 2 days that I'm at my computer, with the beta thing and everything. Google is crushing them. And so it's all right, well, who has the better web, rendering engine designers on staff? I don't really know who's better. All I know is that Chrome is rock solid and stable, and I'm on the beta, beta channel. And WebKit has been wonky since they added multi-process, so it's not looking good for the home team,
Oh, exactly. But I think that the chances of Apple having a meaningful amount of talent shifted onto this project that wasn't already working on it is probably pretty minimal. Because, something's wrong with the leadership at Apple somewhere along the line between the top and WebKit, because Safari has been so terrible since Lion. Really, and I still use Safari as my primary browser, so I still feel this a lot. I don't think anybody who uses Safari on a regular basis will tell you that it's better now than it was in 10.6. There's a few better features and a little bit better support for some web standards things because it's a newer build of WebKit, but I think overall, ever since they split the process model into the renderer versus the front end, it's been slower and more crashy and just generally worse.
I think it's been faster. Stability definitely has been worse. It feels faster to me than it used to be. I think the features and speed and everything. I still use Safari as my main browser as well. Although I run Chrome constantly alongside it, I would still rather use Safari than Chrome. It's just that every once in a while Safari craps out, and that grates on me because it's why doesn't Chrome crap out? Why is Safari crap out? And why do I have a new build of Chrome that presumably fixes bugs and improves performance every 3 days?
Yeah, well, and I've had Chrome tabs crash. I think every Chrome user probably has seen that at least once, but I use Chrome a lot less than I use Safari, so obviously this is not quite valid, but I see way fewer problems in Chrome. The problems I see in Chrome that make me not want to use it are all of Google's creepiness, where they keep trying to reach for more of my data and more of my stuff, and that's just kind of, I find that distasteful. So that's why I don't use the browser. But I can't deny that technologically it is way ahead of Safari.
And I feel like we've come full circle, and now we're back to talking about creepy people like Facebook. No, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. And one thing I was wondering while I was listening to you guys talk is, I feel like there's an obvious answer I'm not realizing, but what is the motivation for Apple to really have a world-class web rendering engine? I wasn't around for the days of Internet Explorer on the Mac, so I never felt that pain. But obviously, it's just prudent in general to have a really good web browser on your platform. But why does Apple need to have the ultra #1 super fantabulous best web experience in the world?
You can reverse it and say all those surveys that are out there, X percentage of the smartphones sold are, Android, and Y percentage are Apple. So then you look at web usage, X percentage of the hits to any popular website, it's overwhelmingly iOS users. And it's because Apple was the first one out of the gate with a web browser that actually worked worth a damn, that fit on your phone. And so that attracted all the people who like browsing the web, and you can browse the web from your phone. I mean, not just for phones, but for anything. Like, it's a strategic advantage to have a really good web rendering engine. And leaving that to someone else, if you're a company like Apple, is crazy, because when you left it to someone else, they do a crappy job. Microsoft doesn't really care about the Mac version. Even when they do a great job, Internet Explorer 5 for Mac was an awesome, in terms of CSS support, and was actually a pretty darn awesome browser. You miss that and everything, but it was amazing. That's why all the designers loved Mac back in the day, because they're like, oh, this thing understands CSS, that spec from 1996. Yeah, that one. It implements 60% of it, but it's better than 0%. But still, if it's not under your control, then Microsoft loses interest and never makes an IE6 for the Mac, or I don't remember what the OS X version was. Maybe that was 6.0. But anyway, they ignore it, and 5. You can't get Mozilla to pay any attention to. And you're like, look, this is hurting our platform. If browsing the web from our computers it sucks that's bad for us. So we need to take the reins on this. And that paid off double when it came time to field a phone. They're like, oh, we already have a web rendering engine, and we wisely chose KHTML instead of the Gecko rendering engine, which is a smaller and lighter weight, and we are driving that project now, and we can tailor it to our platform. Huge dividends, big payoff. It was a great decision to do that, and the WebKit team and the WebKit project are probably the third most important, maybe fourth, I don't know, some third or fourth most important thing that Apple has done in the last couple of decades. It's Mac OS X, iOS, WebKit, and I guess you'd have to include in that the
iPod Hi-Fi.
Yeah, the iPod Hi-Fi and iTunes. Yeah.
Yeah, in that order. I think one thing that annoys me about Google forking it though is this arrogance, and I shouldn't say this is exclusive to Google, because Apple has and will make similarly arrogant moves, but it's the arrogance of them saying basically it's technologically inconvenient for us, for a few of our programmers, to not be to be working in your code, so we're going to fork it, which it basically takes the technological burden off of the handful of people at Google who it's affecting, and puts it onto every web developer in the future. To say now we're going to have one more engine that's going to that we won't know is going to be similar enough that we're going to have to test separately on, and eventually it's going to diverge in how it renders things, so we're going to have to deal with that. I don't know. It feels like.
Did you read Glenn's thing on that?
No.
You don't read anything he writes, I know.
I don't think I saw it. Sorry, yeah, I was gone out of the country for a week.
Oh yes, I know. They had the internet over there in Germany. Anyway, his thing, and I'm mostly on board with this, was that we're past the point where any one rendering engine has enough weight in the market to do something in an incompatible way, and any sort of divergence by any party is seen as damage, and you get dinged for it. No one is dominant enough to say, oh, well, that's just the way Internet Explorer does it, so everyone's got to deal with it. And the point I would add to that, although he might have added this as well, I don't remember, is he says a lot of things, that the variance just among quote-unquote WebKit is already insane. The variance between WebKit on iPhone, WebKit on iPad, WebKit on some other phone platform, WebKit and, some Nokia thing, WebKit on some television connected device, WebKit in various versions of Mac OS X, that variance is already bigger than the variance between Blink and WebKit is going to be. Up until the point where you get to things like NACL, and I'm sure they're going to put Dart in their stupid thing too, but I don't think Google has the weight, at least so far.
Well, isn't Chrome the number one browser now?
Yeah, but not 90%. It's
right.
They have a plurality or whatever the word is for when you don't have more than 50%, but you're the biggest piece of the pie. Look at that vocabulary today.
Nice.
Probably got it wrong. We'll wait for the corrections. But yeah, no, I don't think they have enough weight for that. It's a danger. It's something to look out for, because they do want to put in the native client thing, and they do want to shove Dart down our throats, even though it's not a very interesting language, I don't think. They have all sorts of grand plans, but right now, they're just forking. They're getting rid of all the baggage they don't care about. And I bet Apple's looking on jealously because you know what? We only really care about the Mac and iOS too. Why are we supporting all these other platforms? It's now they're weighed down by the community of people, the WebKit community, right? I mean, maybe they don't feel that way. Maybe they just say, we're going to do what we want, and then we're just going to land our changes, and we're going to break everyone else's platforms and boo-hoo. But, right away, Google's like, finally, freedom. Now we're making a web render engine just for us, drop all the other build targets, drop everything else we're not interested in, and start landing the commits that we care about. The kind of control that Apple sort of had with WebKit up to this point. But, Google's left the baggage behind, and now they're free, and Apple is left holding the bag without Google's help and still having to support the WebKit community. That's why I was thinking, if Google runs away with Blink but keeps it open source, Apple could find themselves in a few years going, you know what, the next version of Safari uses Blink.
And, honestly, if that would also mean they would move more towards the Chrome process model, I would love to see that. But we'll see.
It would be an ego hit for the WebKit team, don't you think? Like all the people who did, the WebKit 2 stuff with the split rendering engine and the Nitro JavaScript engine, and just say, no, we're going with V8 and their process model. And I mean, it would be a downgrade because Apple does embed WebKit in all sorts of things, and it's part of their SDK for their, they have a native SDK for their OS, for both iOS and the Mac. And if you want to do a web view, you can embed it and you get multi-process web rendering. You wouldn't get that with Blink because that logic, again, is in the application, unless they package that up in some way or refine it. But who knows where Blink's going to be in a few years.
Well, I think we see this. This is kind of a common failure with Apple Apple had such a great streak for so long, and they do so many things pretty well that it seems like they're culturally unable to accept when they do things badly or inefficiently or just not as well as everyone else in the market. And they seem often unable or unwilling to turn those things around. And with this, this is the kind of thing where WebKit became dominant and was so successful, not because Apple did it, but because Apple was putting the most effort into it. They started out with a really solid foundation, and they just poured effort into it at a time when there wasn't a lot of effort being poured into web rendering engines, and they weren't built on solid foundations except for WebKit, Gecko, and Nest.
And they staffed up. They hired,
right.
Dave Hyatt from, who he'd formerly worked on Mozilla and everything. Like, they hired all the people who would shed from who had experience, who'd cut their teeth doing the web rendering engine that's going to beat Internet Explorer, the whole Mozilla. All those people, they're disenfranchised, they're disappointed. They will pay you a good salary. Come work for us. Apple's cool. The company's doing well. Maybe you'll get stock options. They were able to staff up with, the sort of the wandering masses of people who with real world experience building web rendering engines, and they did a great job. And compare that with who was out there working on Conqueror, just random people who are kind of into, they want to have a web rendering engine for KDE. But Apple took it and ran with it.
Right. Well, and by the way, I got to mention, everyone's linked to it already, but if you haven't heard this yet, you have to listen to Guy English and Rene Ritchie's podcast, Debug. Not only should you be listening to this podcast anyway, but there's an episode number 11 from 2 weeks ago that had an interview of Don Melton, the guy who I think he headed the WebKit team.
He was managing the WebKit team.
Yeah.
He was brought on. He was the first member of the WebKit team. He was the first manager, and then he came on board at the same time.
And he discussed a lot of this stuff, and it's a really good episode. You should listen to it. I'll put it in the show notes. But anyway, so Apple did so well with that because they were building on a solid foundation and just poured tons of effort into it. Now, Google is doing that. Google is building on a solid foundation of WebKit, and they're pouring tons of effort into it. And so it's going to be really hard for Apple to keep up with that.
Yeah,
and
did you see the
they probably
graphs that
won't.
I put in the chat room?
Oh, no, I don't click links.
Click that link.
Okay, fine. Loading. This is interesting. Loading.
It will take a while to load.
All right, while that's loading, this episode is generously sponsored by Igloo Software. Igloo is an intranet you'll actually like. You can store content like Word documents and Photoshop files, but you can also create content with Igloo's built-in apps. Igloo has apps for blogs, calendars, forums, Twitter-like microblogs, and wikis. It's easy to collaborate because your Igloo has everything built in. Commenting, version control, you can even @mention your coworkers. These features are available on any content type, whether you create it in Igloo or upload it yourself. Igloo's secure enterprise platform is loved by their clients, like RSA, Kimberly-Clark, and IDC. One of the main reasons they love the platform is easy customization. There's drag-and-drop widgets to configure your entire intranet. Anyone can do it. But they don't ignore the technical users either. Everything's 100% customizable. The Igloo website is actually built using their platform. You have full control over CSS and the ability to inject global or per-page JavaScript. There's even an open API. So go check it out today. Get a free 30-day trial at igloosoftware.com/ATP. That's our show, Accidental Tech Podcast. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP. Thank you very much to Igloo Software for sponsoring our show.
Every time I see this Igloo thing, I weep. I wish my work used this for their internet because we do not, and it is not good. Like you don't know what it's like out there in the world, man. But I don't. Microsoft SharePoint, Exchange, like just the worst software in the
Casey
entire
knows
world.
that stuff, right?
Oh, do I ever?
God. And can you
no
imagine?
idea.
Like, I don't know if Casey, in your JOB job, if you have to deal with stuff that's worse than this, but this Igloo stuff is like, oh my God, I would kill for this. Like, we have a wiki. It's not like this wiki. We have a calendar, and it's so painful.
What's especially cool about Igloo, and they're not paying for me to say this. What's especially cool about Igloo is that they like our stuff. They listen to our shows. Like they always sponsored 5x5, and now they're sponsoring this. And like they'll put into the landing page, they'll put in custom stuff to like have jokes about our show in it, or like they gave away an AeroPress last year. Like they like our stuff. They're really supporting us. So I really appreciate that. So thanks to them.
Yeah, I remember. Didn't they have a big Merlin landing page?
Yeah,
with like a SodaStream on it or something.
Exactly. Yeah, like they're really into this stuff.
Yeah,
so they seem like really cool people.
I was like, do they have like a dedicated person whose job it is to listen to these podcasts, or are they just actual fans? I guess they have to be actual fans.
I think they're just actual fans.
How would they? Yeah, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know enough to make those clever, pages with the AeroPress and the Merlin thing or whatever, or be inspired enough to do something that funny if they were just doing it as part of their job.
Right. Plus, I think they're in Canada. Let me double check that. But I think that's why it's called Igloo.
I was going to say, it's Igloo. What else do you need to look at?
Are there igloos in Canada?
Maybe
snow.
up in the very top part, I guess. I mean, it would have to be, right?
God, where's Dalrymple when we need him?
I know. Anyway, so I got this page to load. Let me go back to it here. So what is this? Graphs of commits? Oh, yeah, look at that.
So look at the ones, summary of activity, reviewed commits per company, active authors per company. Blue is Apple, and the yellowish pea green is Google.
Yikes.
So you can see what has happened here. Apple's, measuring commits is not a good measure. I wish it was like lines of code or something.
Well, that's not good either.
It's a rough estimate. And if you look at it, you're like, who's been the driving force behind WebKit in the past several years? And you look at these graphs, and it looks like it hasn't been Apple,
Yeah, I would say, just based on whatever the heck they're measuring here, it looks like Google started to outpace Apple in about 2009 or so.
Yeah, it was as soon as Chrome came out, because they were in stealth mode until Chrome appeared, right? And then Chrome comes out. I mean, like, the active authors, I think, is a reasonable metric, because the commits, you're like, you don't know how big the commits are and what's, the standards for the size of a commit. Maybe they're just putting in a bunch of little changes. But the active authors is like, Apple's got an uphill battle, because people who work for Google are not dumb and are not terrible programmers, and that's a big area with the Google color in terms of number of authors. And so, yeah, it's a concern, I think.
Yeah, that in fact, what's interesting is that on the authors quantity graph, Nokia actually has a few more than Apple.
Where do you see that?
Authors per company? Yeah.
Yeah, which color is Nokia? Red?
Red, yeah. And Apple's the light blue, not the dark. Anyway, this is probably really boring to listen to. Let's move on.
I think you're misreading that graph. The graph will be in the show notes.
Right.
People can judge for themselves.
All right, we'll see. But
If
anyway.
you hover, it looks like it's half as many for Nokia as Apple. If you just hover somewhere, it'll.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at the
show it.
pie below it, but that might be like
I
the
was
entire time. All right. Anyway,
Sorry, most boring podcast ever.
let's listen to us click around and browse the web. Moving on. Do you want to talk about Panic Status Board?
That's
yeah,
fine.
what I want to talk about Panic Status Board is the pricing, which I think is genius, especially coming in after Jury's big thing on pricing. It's like, I don't think Panic needed to hear this from Jury. They knew it already, and they're demonstrating their mastery of app pricing.
Yes. So let's first give a quick overview of it. Give them a little free plug here because they're cool people and they're very friendly. Our friends at Panic, they made this app called Status Board that they had something similar for internal use, and then they decided a couple of years ago to just start making it into a product. And it is basically what it sounds like. It's for iPad, and it's optimized specifically also if you want to output to a big like HDTV panel on a wall in an office, but you don't have to do that. You can just use it on an iPad, and it just has like customizable little widgets that you can arrange on the screen to show things like any kind of thing you can graph. You can put in there. They have built-in widgets for things like weather and tweets and stuff like that. And so it's made to be like hanging on a wall in a tech company or something, which is exactly how they use theirs, to just show like, status of the company, how things are moving, any kind of metrics you want to graph, etc. And I don't think it's the first thing to ever do this, but it certainly looks like it's probably the nicest. And it's interesting. So, the whole tech blogosphere, oh God, kind of exploded talking about this yesterday when it came out, just mostly because we're friends with those guys. Like almost everyone who's writing about it has met these guys at some point, and everyone who works at Panic is ridiculously nice and smart. So it's a pretty easy company to get friendly with, and so part of it was just because of that. But I think the app is pretty damn good, and the only thing that the problem I have with it, first of all, I think it was very smart to require iOS 5 because that means it can run on the iPad 1. And I bet a lot of people, myself included, have an old iPad 1 lying around not doing anything.
Yep.
So that's very nice. Second thing is that I wish I had a way to mount this in my bathroom. This would be like the perfect like bathroom wall display. If you're
you just got to get a TV and then just AirPlay to it.
What would you be monitoring while you're on the pot?
Oh, he's got things to monitor.
Well, that would be like the perfect like RSS ticker kind of spot. Weather. People bring the paper in there. This would be the digital version. You wouldn't have to touch it.
I need to see the soft layer network failures in real time.
Oh, God. I don't know what's going on over there. But anyway, so what John was alluding to is that the pricing of this is interesting. So it's $10 to buy the app. And then there's an in-app purchase if you want the ability to output to the TV. Now, they've actually disabled AirPlay mirroring programmatically. I don't know exactly how they do that, but I haven't looked. I'm sure it's just some flag where you can say this shouldn't mirror.
Same way HBO Go did.
There you go. Yeah, so I'm sure it's supported in the SDK. But so they disabled AirPlay mirroring, supposedly because they said they tried it and the quality was terrible, like the picture quality was terrible. So instead, they have their own custom handling of the external display, which I think requires. I don't think it can go over to AirPlay. I think it requires one of the cable adapters.
Yeah, the HDMI adapter. And even that one they were complaining about with the Lightning connector, how they did a whole blog post about how it recompresses stuff and it's all gross looking, whereas the old ones...
And now we know why they were so interested in that. But they took TV out and made that an in-app purchase that was originally priced at $50. And then Rusty from Shifty Jelly was complaining on Twitter about it because he's in Australia, so he kind of got the app before the entire U.S. because of the date, the release date. So he started complaining about it. Really, like the first hour it was released, Panic responded, and then they decided to lower the price. So now it's a $10 in-app purchase on top of the $10 app to get TV output. And so I think a lot of things about this are very interesting. First of all, I think we'll get to the app price in a second. First of all, the charging for TV out, which is something these devices can normally do for free to mirror at least, doing your own implementation which you think is better and then disabling the mirroring and then charging for it, that's going to anger a lot of people. And so that's kind of a ballsy move. Charging $50 for that is even more interesting because you figure I can see where they're coming from. Like if you're doing this, you probably have dedicated a TV or monitor solely to this purpose. So you've spent hundreds or thousands of dollars for the hardware to plug this into.
You're dedicating an iPad to it too.
Exactly.
I maybe I wouldn't have stuck to the $50, but I think both sides, the app price and the aftermarket purchase, could have been increased because this is not a casual application. You're like, oh, you know what, I can use in my life as status. If you need a status board, it's because you have an environment like a company or like a work group or something that needs you are signed up. I'm looking for something to be so I can monitor the status of things, and whatever that thing is important enough that I need to see it now. And it's like selling things to businesses. The reason you can charge so much money for businesses is like they're a business. They're already paying through the nose to rent their office and to pay for healthcare for all their employees, and their money's going out like crazy. And if someone, says, oh, we want a thing to put up a status board in the room. How much is that? $700? Fine, just buy it. Like, we have these big TVs in our conference rooms that you can like hook up your laptop to, and they have a camera on top of them, and they have little PCs strapped to the back of them. I don't even want to know how much those things cost. They're probably like thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
They're terrible, by the way. They're absolutely terrible. So anybody who's in the market for a status board of any kind would not blink for 2 seconds if this thing costs, maybe $100 is extreme, but like $20, forget it. That's like, it's basically free.
Right, and originally
basically,
$60. Like, if that was still the price, and if they go back to that,
that's still free. Anything less than like $300 is like discretionary petty cash spending, and anybody who wants to have a status board.
Right, because if you're putting like a $330 iPad stuck to the back of a $500 TV or $600 TV, then
the software is free.
Effectively the software is free, and so like, and I think the pricing is smart too, because most people who download it are probably never going to connect it to any kind of external display. Most people who download it are probably curious nerds who want a status thing like for their desk, or it's the same people. And first of all, like me, of course, I'm not denying membership in that group, but it's similar to how in the late '90s, people started getting little tiny LCD matrix displays that would connect via serial or USB to their computer, and having their CPU fan speed and temperature on a little LCD display next to their monitor, just to have little additional information. And of course, people do that with cars all the time, and they have like those tacky external meters and everything. Like, people, like nerds, like that kind of stuff. We like that, and so to have something like this where many nerds have old iPads sitting around not doing much, and so dedicating an iPad to it is not that much of a stretch for a lot of people like us, and so to have this like little $10 app, granted $10 for an iPad app is on the high end of what people usually charge, and I'm sure they're getting a lot of flack for that, but it's such a cool thing. Like, we want that, and if any of us actually get it working and mount it somewhere and use it every day, it's totally worth $10.
Yep. And that the low price of $10 makes me think they couldn't decide whether like the curious nerd market and the business market, or not even just business, people who actually need a status board is one market, and curious nerds is another market, and they're kind of trying to straddle the line between. It's not totally outside the curious nerd range. I mean, I bought it. I'm never going to freaking use the thing, but I have a panic problem. I buy every single one of their applications, regardless of whether I'm ever going to use it, because I want them to continue to exist and succeed. I'm also a little bit of a cable sasser fanboy. But anyway, that's the curious nerd market. But like, you could ignore them entirely and price the thing at $200, and you might actually make more money. Because like, if this catches on with businesses, they'll just buy it. They will just buy it. If they need something like this, they'll buy it. Because if they don't, they want to have a status board, and maybe they'll see some story in Wired, like they had that status board story. Like, why doesn't our status board look that good? Ours is just some web page with ugly fonts that we put up on a screen. It's not, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I think the pricing here is very smart, because, and I think the original pricing of the $50 in-app purchase for the TV out and a $10 purchase for the app, I think that's even smarter. And they'll probably have to go back to that at some point, because it does straddle that line, because you need a low entry price for the app, because it's also an ecosystem. It's a platform. It's a small one, but it's still a platform. You need people to develop modules for common things to be stuck in there. And so, like, out of the box, for instance, it doesn't support any kind of like Google Analytics or any kind of web analytics engine. There's already people working on that, and there's already some engines that already have plugins for it. Like, I think Google Analytics would be a very obvious candidate for something that needs to be here. And
someone's already whipped that up. I saw.
Probably. Oh yeah, good. Okay. It wasn't done by like noon today, and then I stopped looking. But
it was done on launch day. It was like it's I don't know if it's done in a nice way, but someone just threw together some Ruby to to connect, and like you just have that running on your server and point it to your own URL, like the do-it-yourself.
Oh yeah, right. So like there's. Like, they need an ecosystem to start building to add value to this thing, so that the people who want to make a TV will have an easier time with it and will more want to do that. So like, I think it's a very smart split to have a relatively inexpensive app for the nerds to play with, and then be able to sell it to people who are devoting hardware to it, to be able to sell it at a higher price to them. So I think it's genius, and I don't think they're going to really sell a massive amount of those in-app purchases, but I don't think they need to sell a massive amount of them.
Well, the other thing I thought was interesting is I looked at I don't know if I should call it an SDK, but basically the mechanism by which you can input random data that they're not privy to into the app. And it was very, very straightforward. If I remember right, for tables, for graphs, you can give it CSV or JSON. For tables, you can give it CSV or HTML, I believe.
Tables, yeah.
Yeah. And then you can just go wild and say, and they will render just straight up HTML, be it table or graph or whatever, anything you want, just HTML as one of these little widgets. And it was very cool. And I looked at I think it was 3 different PDFs that talk about these 3 different methods: tables, charts, and just random anything. And the sum total of the documentation for all of that was, 15 pages or something like that. John, did you look at these as well?
It reminded me of a very Apple way to do things, and I kind of mean that in a good way and also in a bad way. I don't know if this is a good way or a bad way. You can decide for yourself, but like, Panic decided how things should look on a status board, because that's part of the charm of the product, is we're going to give you a nice looking status board, not that thing that you had some random programmer throw together, right? We're going to have our designers work on it and like lay down the law for like, these are the types of graphs you can have. These are the colors they can pick because they look cool together. This is how the things are shaded. And like, it's not just like, hey, look, it's a you have a little corner of a web view and just go nuts and put your stupid blinking background and auto playing music in it. Like, that's not how it's going to work, right? But then the SDK is necessarily very limited to, these are the kind of things you can do. These are the elements you can put in them. You can have a word, you can have an image, you can have an optional little line of bar graphs. You can use HTML tables. There's a couple of styles we define. It's very, very limited, where if a company like Google did it, like look at Google's graphing API. That's the other end of the spectrum, where they said, we're going to make a graphing API, and it's going to be just like, we are not, it's like, the DHH thing. It's not opinionated software. The Google Graph API is, we have a bazillion parameters. You can make a whole bunch of graphs. It's extremely flexible. Make anything, any color, any size, any label you want. And we have this really complicated API for doing that, and go nuts. Where the Panic one was like, there are 7 things you can do, or 3 things you can do, a couple of variations on them, and that's it. And so it's extremely limited in terms of flexibility, but the reward you get for that is it's impossible to make a status board that's just horrendously ugly. And the tech they use to do it, like, I look at it and I think to myself, CSV and HTML tables, like, I guess that'll work, but like they didn't develop a general purpose system for an API and then build their APIs on it. They just kind of decided, these are the kind of things we're going to have. What's the most convenient thing for you to emit? Like, that's one possible strategy, but like, I don't know, maybe it's the programmer disease. Let's cite the XKCD comic. You ever see the one where someone asks the other person to pass the salt, and he gets hung up trying to implement a general purpose system for passing things across tables? I'm probably blowing the punchline, but it's like programmer mindset, where you can't just do some simple thing. You have to like, wait, no, I can develop a generic system for doing things like this and use this to build the thing you want me to do. That's the programmer mindset. And looking at their API and a lot of Apple's APIs and things that Apple does, clearly they're not infected by that disease. They're like, why should we do that? We know exactly what we want to do. Let's make it as simple as possible, even if we haven't created a Lego construction set for building arbitrary status display things, because they haven't. So that's the trade-off in what they've done. Well, I don't know if you want to decide whether that's good or bad.
I mean, to some extent, I think pragmatically, as a user of this thing, pragmatically, that's a very good thing, because this is like, for the most part, if you're building one of these or tweaking this or setting one up for yourself or your company, it's futzing around. It's overhead. It's not a business critical thing, and so you don't really want your programmers or yourself to be tied up tweaking this thing for 3 weeks. You want
to get in, get out,
exactly,
and not make it be ugly, right? They're keeping it's on rails, and to more DHH lingo there,
right? It is designed so that you give it your data, and you make a few minor adjustments, and that's it. And you don't have to think about how to make it nice looking or anything like that. They take care of that for you. That's a major appeal, I think.
But as soon as you want to do something that it doesn't support, you're sad.
Exactly, and that's certainly the Apple way.
Yeah.
But I think for this, because it's non-mission critical, I think the right answer for a lot of people who face that is, oh well, just live without it or deal with what it does do. I'm not sure how many people will actually think that way. I think that's the pragmatic.
It's version 1.0, like, because so the guy who wants to see the live video camera of the security camera that's out in front of his building is one of his status board items. Oh, we don't currently support live video, right? But like, if they get enough demand for live video,
right,
they will come up with a nice, attractive, simple way to do live video, and version 2 will have a live video thing. But they've just not made out the gate a generic status board type thing where you can build anything you want. You can't. They gave you a couple little things. This is what you can do. Future versions may have new ones, but they're not designing an OS. Like, they're not making, it's very constrained. And like Casey said, the big payoff for that is, like, I read every word of those instructions because it's like 3 pages of text, nicely written, simple. You don't have to really know anything about anything to understand what they're saying. You just need to have a little tiny bit of background, and like, I don't even know if you need any web development background. I guess you would to put up a server or something, but it's so dead simple and so possible for normal people to do.
Well, and you remember one of the things they cited was, hey, if you have Dropbox, you could just put I think it was the CSV example. You can just put the CSV in Dropbox and you copy a public link, and next thing you know, now it's in your status board.
Like, that's how it's geared. It's explaining to people who don't know that, hey, did you know that something you put in Dropbox is accessible via HTTP on the internet? People might not know that. And like, you wouldn't mention that if you were writing technical documentation, but Panic documentation, there's not a lot of words, but take 2 sentences out to remind the people who are reading this. Maybe they don't realize you can do that with Dropbox,
And one thing I mean, and this app so far, I mean, it is a 1.0. There's a few people reporting crashes on the iTunes reviews, but overall, the level of polish in this is incredible. I mean, like Fog Creek, famously Joel Spolsky with Joel on Software he and Michael Pryor started this company, and they have a few very successful products. And one of their first major product, Fog Bugs, is so successful that it seemed to, at least for a while, basically keep the entire company afloat pretty much entirely on its own. And it made so much money for them that they were able to make things extremely nice for their developers, make very, very nice office environment, and just add a ridiculous amount of features into this product. And it's like, they had this great cash cow, and so they were just redirecting all of that cash into ridiculous features for this thing. Panic, I don't know what their cash cow is. They have a number of well-known products. Maybe Transmit, I would guess, but Panic, and actually probably Coda these days. But
actually, we know what their cash cows are because somebody pointed out.
It says so on their example screenshots.
Well, sort of. If you look, God, I'm trying to find.
They just tweeted a link that showed their revenue and the graphs for for the past day, and you see the status board line shooting up like a rocket, and everything else looks like 0. But that's obviously the reason they showed that is it's launch day, and there's no numbers in the y-axis, so
right.
It's like
right.
But like Panic, I feel like they are a company where they've had their cash cows. And they've made a very nice office and made things very nice to developers. And rather than just adding a whole bunch of features constantly with all that money, they add polish with all those resources. They the Fog Creek waves, you just add feature after feature after feature to Fog Bugs.
You know why that is, of course.
Because they're cool? I don't know. What?
Because Joel's from Microsoft and they're a bunch of Windows users. That's what it is. It's a different ethos. Like they came from Microsoft. You two maybe don't realize it because that's where you came from too. But it's just a different ethos. They come from the world of Microsoft. They weren't even big on Mac support. It's like why their software was nice, but it never quite looked nice, like as nice as you would think it should look.
Right. It has every feature under the sun, though.
Yeah, it took a while to even get Joel to switch to a Mac. I think he's on a Mac now. But like that, those guys are from they're like the semi-enlightened PC, developer type things, but they kind of know what they're supposed to be doing. But they just, like the difference between them and Panic is a great illustration because, the Fog Creek probably has more great programmers than Panic does. They have more people, period. Like it's a much bigger thing. Like, and the Fog Creek people are really smart and successful and do great things and have a great working environment and all that stuff. But when we look at the end products, and there's just no comparison. They are different kinds of products for different audiences.
Totally.
So everyone go out and buy Status Board.
It's a good app. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I don't need this app, but now I'm looking for a reason to need it.
Yeah, if you're a curious nerd, you're like, well, I gotta find some reason to use this.
Yeah,
because we have old iPads. I'm probably never gonna use it, but it's just I just like that it exists.
And I'm usually in my various businesses, I'm generally pretty terrible at monitoring metrics. I just don't do it, and many metrics I don't even collect. And I don't do any kind of like data mining or anything.
You can't
like
manage
that.
what you can't measure.
Yeah,
Or you don't measure. Sorry.
and so I feel like this is like an aspirational purchase for me. Like maybe if I buy this cool app to do this cool thing on my wall or my desk, then maybe I'll become that kind of person who starts measuring things and paying attention. It's very unlikely, but maybe.
Weirder things have happened. And what I was going to say before is very early on, somebody noticed, and I can't find for the life of me where this link came from, but I saw it on Twitter. Somebody noticed that they had posted pictures of the status board, I think perhaps when they were dog fooding it, but it wasn't released. And you could see their revenue graph. And this was, right before the status board public release. And it was very, very, very clear that their desktop apps were making all of the money, and their iOS apps, by comparison, were making almost none.
I saw that graph too, but like the x-axis was like 3 days, so you can't really
That's
tell.
true.
I mean, but historically, Transmit I think was their big thing. But they also have Unison with the Usenet subscription thing, and I always wondered how much that makes because that's recurring revenue, and it's a small audience, but the people who
Yeah, but you weren't supposed to talk about Usenet.
Yeah, I know. Like I don't know. It's an interesting wrinkle of them producing a status board product and doing stories about, like, there was a Wired story before the app was even out about status board things, showing their status board, and they like it's in their office and everything, and it's kind of like revealing the innards of your business semi-accidentally. I don't think they probably care because, like, so what? What are you going to do with that information?
I don't think it was that accidental.
You make the next panic. See how easy it is.
Right. I think before we leave this topic, I think we should revisit the $10 price point of just buying the app, because that's also unusual in how high it is for an iOS app. And obviously the question, there's obviously two big questions here. One would be, can they pull that off? And then the other one would be, can you pull it off? Can X pull it off?
Pull it off?
Yeah, right. You could definitely, but so I think the question of whether they can pull it off is probably yes for a long time, if not indefinitely, just because of to some degree there's not that much competition in this market, but also just because of who they are. That they are very well known already. They have a great reputation, and their customers know that their stuff is very well made, and so their customers are very likely to be willing to jump in blind and blow $10 on the chance this might be good or useful to them. And if they really do think it will be very useful to them, then $10 is not that ridiculous of a price to pay. It's not like it's $100 or $1,000. Like it's $10, which if most of their customers are coming from the desktop world, where software is usually far more than $10, then that seems like a very inexpensive product.
Well, there's also the curious nerd market is presumably the people who understand that software is worth money. We all know the people who don't understand why you would ever pay for software, and like they want Angry Birds to be free and blah blah blah. But they would not be happy customers of the status board app or wouldn't want it. So if you're selling to the curious nerds, like, oh, these people already understand that you pay money for software, so I don't have to overcome that hurdle. I don't have to pander to their 99-cent thing. Well, I think that's the case. I think that for the status board app in particular, that there's not a lot of looky-loos who are just browsing through the store and like, oh, I'll buy that status board app.
Well, that's true, yeah. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that geeks are willing to pay more.
I think that, but not so much more, but they just understand. It's not outrageous to them for the $10.
Right,
$50 thing is probably still over their line for those people who aren't buying for a business, and they're just like, I just wanted to play with it, but on my TV, I'm not paying $50. Like, and they already went back on that a little bit, but. I think if you can sell, because think about things like Pages and stuff like that. Like at a certain point, you're selling to people who accept that software is worth money, and $10 is not that much in the grand scheme of things. You already bought an iPad; it was a lot more than $10.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think what we have here is a it's fine for panic situation. Like they can charge $10, but the question is. Can any iOS developers charge $10 for a good product? And
to go back to the jury thing, it's like if you make software for dentists, you can charge more than that.
Right. Like this is, as you said, this is very clearly aimed at businesses and nerds. And both of those, especially businesses, are usually willing to pay for stuff at all, and businesses you can charge a good amount for, and this is still cheaper than anything else they would probably find. But so it depends on what you're doing, and in this market, it does seem like there's really not any kind of major competition for the same kind of quality or taste put into this app. But I wonder. Like if I was making a new app today, like I found with Instapaper that I really can't price it any higher than like $5, and currently it's $4 even, just because I found that I made more there.
Well, that's an app that everyone who owns an iPhone should have. Statusport is not an app that everyone who owns an iPad should have. You know what I mean? Like you are trying to sell like who could benefit from Instapaper? Everybody, anybody who reads web pages on their phone, which is basically anybody with an iPhone, can benefit from this app. Who can benefit from Statusport? Already, you're just cutting it down to just a tiny, narrow fraction of the world who even has need for this in their life, and so you can charge them more because if they need it, they need it. It's not just like a frivolous type of thing, So I think that's a spectrum that Jerry was talking about. Like if you're making a to-do app, there's a bazillion of them. Anybody can use a to-do app. It's not like specific to some particular problem domain. Where Statusport is, it's specific to if you've been thinking about for any reason in your life. I'd like if I could see that up on a board, like just because even if you just think it would be cool, you are one of the people who has that need. But most people will never have that need, have no reason to ever have anything like that. So. Yeah, you can't, like if you make, quote unquote, boring software for specific people with very specific problems, you can get away with charging them more. But Instapaper, you can't, because that Instapaper is for everybody. It's for the whole, it's basically the Angry Birds of, like anybody can use it.
I guess that's true.
Anyone could find it useful.
And like I found, like whenever I've done a search for some kind of relatively specialized app, I've always found that A, they're all terrible. Like whatever, like if you're looking for some kind of specific, X app, they're terrible.
Dentistry software, terrible.
Yes, like they're all terrible, and most of them are not 99 cents or free. Most of them are like $5 or $8. Like they're up there in the iOS price world. And part of that's just because they can, because there's no competition or very little, and part of that's because if you're not selling to the mainstream and you need to be able to pay a programmer or pay yourself a reasonable rate, you have to charge more than $1 because you're just not going to sell that much volume.
Well, I mean, but I think it's actually the reverse, though, because like if you are a dentist, you're not going to do everything on paper. You need dentistry software. And if a dentist decides they want to do something on their phone having to do with dentistry, and they search for dentistry apps, and there's like 2 of them, and you're one of them, like, you can charge, you have the power to charge more because there's the terrible application that crashes on launch, and then there's yours which doesn't. And you can charge that guy almost whatever you want within reason because he is a captive audience. Whereas when he searches for games, he has many choices, and they're all perfectly fine and they're all great. And he searches for to-do lists, like there's a million of them, but the choices are slim. Like maybe there's no apps for a particular kind of medical imaging that you want to be able to, sort of airplay images from the big giant, like who knows, but like there's very specific problems. Someone has a problem in their job and they would like to use an iOS app to help them solve it in some cool way. And they probably fantasize about like, boy, I wish there was something that did that. If one of those things appear or 2 of them appears, they'll put down $10, in a second, like, cause they've been dying to give someone money for something, and then the app will be terrible. So if you can field even just a competent entry in those things, you can charge a lot more money. Usually requires some domain knowledge, which is, why you're able to charge a little bit more as well. But if you can field a great app, like, Statusport is a great app, then, you're so far ahead of the game.
All right, you want to wrap it up?
I think we're good.
Yeah, we're going long here.
All right, thanks to Igloo Software for sponsoring this episode again. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP to start a free trial there because they're awesome. And, let's play it out with the song.
Now the show is over, they didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research, Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them EYLISS, so that's Casey List, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse, it's accidental, accidental. They didn't mean to, accidental, accidental. Tech podcast so long.
What song are you going to play?
I'll play the same song again.
Which one? I like the second one with the bleeps and boops.
You are so into the bleeps and boops.
Thus concludes another thrilling episode.
I like that one so
And the other one is so catchy. It gets stuck in your head.
No, this is what happens if you let the Fish fan pick the music.